Welcome back to the Let's Learn Angular series where I record myself learning Angular in real time. It's like a live stream, except for it's not a live stream. I'm not distracted by all the chat and trying to engage with people. I can just really dial in and focus on learning Angular. Now, in the last episode, episode number 12. Oh yeah, this is episode 13, by the way, in case you didn't know from the title and the thumbnail. We finished the Tour of Heroes tutorial. Felt like it took a long time, but we got it. We made it and we learned a ton. At least I learned a ton. I hope you did too. In this episode, before I go on to learning more things, I thought now would be a perfect time to dial it back and actually review everything that we've learned so far. It's actually a great time for me personally because I took a break from doing the Angular tutorials for actually about a week now, because I got ahead on the videos, so I was posting every single day, but I was actually a few videos ahead. I took some time off and I've been learning some Express and Mongo. I've been doing that stuff on Twitch. But yeah, it's been a little bit. And if you've ever heard of a learning strategy called spaced repetition, I can do a whole video on that topic actually, but basically you learn something, you take a bit of a break, and then you go and review it. And the act of recalling that information out of your brain, you get better at recalling that information. That's how you really learn stuff. That's how you learn fast. So today we're just going to review everything that we've learned so far. And yeah, let me jump into, I'm going to go into Notion real quick. Just let me pull it up here. And what we still have yet to do, just so you can see for future videos. We do still want to clarify some stuff on dependency injection here. The relationship between injectors, services, and providers has been confusing to me. I'm sure some of you following along probably are confused by that as well. The one thing we didn't cover in that tutorial was handling state across components in your application. We saw how to pass state from a parent down into a child, but not from one sibling to another sibling. And if you don't know what I mean by that, just keep watching these videos because there's definitely going to be a video on this. And then another thing, I mean, I'm pretty sure I can figure this out. I'm sure deploying Angular isn't any different than deploying other front-end applications, but I feel like this whole guide is not complete if I don't do that. And then I want to learn a little bit of testing in Angular. So those are some things that we're going to do in the future. And we started adding a few questions here, which I may keep adding more questions to answer later. I think we're going to review switch map. That was a thing that I wasn't 100% clear on what that was doing. So later we might come back to that. But let's go over some of the concepts in Angular that we've sort of covered. My notes are very rough and they're very short, but I think I can bounce into the application and we'll kind of go back and forth between the notes, the application, and then I think a good idea is to actually walk through the code at the end of the tutorial and just read everything line by line and like go through it and make sure we remember everything. So one of the first concepts in Angular is components, and I think that this is actually important because, well, it's important to take note of because component has quite a few meanings in the web dev world. There's of course native web components, that's a thing, and then there's the concept of a component. You know, when we think about how we like to put UIs together, we think of kind of cutting that app up into these little sections, and usually we call those sections components, and they're meant to be composed together so that all the different pieces of our application are reusable. You don't want to have to like copy and paste all the code and logic for this like 6 select that you make on one page because you need it somewhere else. You want to turn that thing into a component so it's like reusable in lots of places in your app. Angular has the concept of components, but it's actually a very specific thing. And what a component is in Angular is a directive. We'll kind of explain what a directive is in a minute. But really you can think of components in Angular, actually specifically what it means is you have a class, a JavaScript class or a TypeScript class probably, because most of us are writing TypeScript if we're doing Angular. and it's using that decorator, the component decorator. And if you don't know what decorators are, let's just jump into the code for like a real example. And would this be my video if we didn't start off with uncommitted changes from the last video? I don't think so. So let's real quick do a review of what we were doing here. So we added the search heroes method. We added the component here. We dropped in the styles, brought in the template for searching for heroes, and then we updated the hero search component that was generated with all the logic. So basically we can just say add search functionality to heroes, and we'll just call that a day. But let's look at our let's say app component TS. So basically a component is just any class that is using this at component decorator. A decorator is just a special thing that's is it technically, you know, I'll have to double check if decorators are even a thing in JavaScript or not. But basically it's attaching metadata to this class. That, so my understanding is there's actually a special plugin that you have to you pull in. I'm sure Angular's just wired up with this automatically. Something metadata. That's probably not the best answer to what that is, but we can open up Google here. We just say like, what is a decorator in, let's start with JavaScript. I'm curious if anything comes up, because I vaguely remember that there was, so there's decorator, the design pattern, but there's also decorator like the syntax. So TypeScript has, right, because decorators aren't actually implemented in JavaScript, right? It's something that I think is still being worked on, but TypeScript sort of just went ahead and implemented their own version of decorators. But really you can kind of think of it as just a thing that attaches some metadata to a class or to a property on a class, that can tell your tooling, in this case it's a framework, that our tool is Angular, and this gives Angular a way to know things about this, like how do we want this component to be used. So remember, if I go to like the index.html file, we have this app root element. This element exists because we have this component registered with selector, and we called it app root. So any component that we did, if I do heroes component, this will also be registered with a selector. It'll be app heroes. And if I look at a use case of how that's actually being used, let's say if I go to the app component HTML file, we can see, oh yeah, I forgot about the router outlet, so we will have to review that. But I guess if I wanted to go to that component, just go hero component HTML, and or no, where, so we don't actually use this one, I forgot, because it's registered with the router. So what would be an example of a component that's being used in another component? I guess app messages is one. So if I go to the app messages component TS file, app messages component TS file, that's the script, app messages component TS. Ooh, that I got tricked there. App component. Oh no, sorry, we call it messages component. Right. But we registered it as app messages. So that's why that's available over here, is because it's registered that way. And yeah, so that is kind of the high level view of like what a component is in Angular and what decorators are. So let's go through here. We got and remember, so components are actually directives. So there's like a lower level thing in Angular called directive. So I could, instead of importing component, I think it's called directive, which is another decorator. And I could do something like this. Directives don't have template URLs or style URLs, but they do have selectors. And what else do they have? If I hit Control Space, I can see all the things that are valid. So there's a thing called export as, which we didn't learn in the tutorial. Defines the name that can be used in the template to assign the directive to a variable. Not really sure. Defines the name that can be used in the template to assign this directive to a variable. I think I'd have to maybe look at the docs to understand that a little better. We got things like host, host inputs, just in JIT usually means just in time, outputs, providers, queries. I don't know what any of this stuff means because we haven't really dove into creating custom directives. But basically directives, if we remember from our glossary of terms, we did write some stuff down from the documentation. So let's see, we go down here and I go to directive. There's a way to create custom elements in Angular. This can be a component, an attribute, or a structural thingy is the word that I use. But yeah, basically it could be an attribute on an element. It could be like technically, I guess it could be a component, right? But component's just the higher level, component's just the higher level directive. That's kind of specific to all the functionality that we know and expect of from components in Angular. And yeah, hopefully that makes enough sense. You know, I find when I'm learning this stuff, there's always like, you know, everything is a path that you can go down and just like deep dive into it, right? Like obviously I don't understand everything about directives in Angular, and there's probably lots to learn about components as well. But I definitely think I understand it enough that I'm perfectly fine to go out and build applications. And I have this kind of this metadata, I guess, in my head that I could always access and know that like directive is a thing that I can probably use to create and like add my own functionality to the templating language is how I think of it. So if I ever came across a problem that I thought could be solved with that, I would probably go in deep dive into directives more. That'd be one of the things that I would research. And by the end of that, by solving an actual real problem that I have with directives, I would come out the other side and know directives better. But to just go and read documentation for the sake of documentation, I probably really wouldn't learn a whole lot. So yeah, that's directives and components. The other concepts we took notes on here, remember we had the Angular CLI that we installed, so you can use the Angular CLI to generate all sorts of things. Let's see if I can, there we go, codify that, which is just ng generate component, and then you give it a name, and the name can have slashes in it, and it'll tell Angular where in your application you kind of want that to slide into. I can demonstrate that really quick, just for the sake of practice. So let's open up my the files here and open editors. Let's close all of those. That's too much noise. And we'll minimize all that for now. So let's go ng is it generate component, and we'll just say my custom hero component. Actually, I guess you don't need to call it component because it'll be like, my custom thingy. My custom thingy. All right, let's see what does that give us? Oh, ng not found. That is probably because I'm using the wrong version of Node. So I'm just gonna nvm use. And actually, for those of you who don't know what an Nvmrc file is, I'm assuming most of you know NVM, which is like the Node version manager. If you don't know what it is, you should download it because it lets you switch between versions of Node very easily, and it supports a file called Nvmrc. And you can drop this into your project, and I think the syntax is just v, and then you do whatever version you want, which in this case was 16.0. 3.0 is the one that I used when I installed this. So it's always good to just use the same version of Node coming into a project that you use to create this file here, this package lock file, which is the first time that I ran npm install, which actually technically happened when I generated the application. But once that's there, you can just nvm use, and you don't have to give it an actual version. The version that you're seeing here is just some autocomplete stuff. That's a plugin that I have. But if I just type nvm use, no nvmrc file found. That's because I forgot to give it a dot. So make sure you don't forget the dots. Dot nvmrc. And then if I got the syntax right there, it should, whoops, nvm use. And so it found an nvmrc file with version 16.3.0, and I happen to have 16.3.0 installed on my machine, and so it just switched it. So very handy file to add to your projects, so that you can just quickly switch to the correct version of Node that you were using in that project. It's really hard to remember. In JavaScript land, you tend to switch versions of Node all the time. And anytime that you install something globally, it's bound to that version of Node that you installed. So now if I go ng generate component, say my custom thingy, this time it'll work because I'm on the version of Node that I had installed when I installed the CLI. And we can just see here, it went source app, and then my became a directory, and then thingy became the component, and all the blank CSS file, the dummy HTML file, our stubbed spec file, and then the starting point for a component. With these things wired up, our template and our CSS is wired up. And remember, it also knows to go up into your your module, and it'll import. So thingy component got imported here, and then it added it to the declarations down here. Does all that in one command, which is awesome. But I'm gonna just nuke. Actually, I'm gonna stage this because I want to keep that RC file around, but I'm gonna discard everything else. And let's just give this a commit real quick. Add nvmrc. It's a good thing to have. And yeah, just clean up the editor again, and let's jump back into Notion. So yeah, the command scaffolds the component and stuff, kind of saw that stuff, updates the module to import the component, and then components need to be imported into a module in order to be used. So this is always a key thing to remember. I could see this being something you might forget if you're manually creating your components. You have to go to the module. Basically, the module becomes like this grouping of like all the components that can be used in a section of your app. The one thing that this Tour of Heroes application didn't do is expose us to more than one module. I guess technically it exposes to more than one module, right? Because we have a routing module. Like technically this is a module. So I mean, this is one use case for having multiple modules, is just for organization. So like all our routes are just being set up in one place, and then if you go to our app module, we're importing that routing module, which is a thing that we made. We just add it to the imports here. So that's actually a really good sort of demo of how you can create like reusable code, and like how would you organize things in Angular, right? Like you can kind of look at examples. Like there's browser module is technically built in, forms module is built in, this HTTP client module is built in. But you can think like if you had any sort of common business rules in your app that belong together and you don't know where they fit, like put them in a module and then import that module into your root module, which is your app module. But yeah, I guess I could see reasons for, if your app was big enough, you might even have more modules just for grouping, like maybe in certain sections of your application you only need so many modules, because I'm not 100% sure about this, but I feel like there's probably a performance hit every time you load a module, and it has like all these declarations and imports. So if you can break your application up into distinct modules, and I'm just like, kind of talking out my butt because I don't know if this is true, but I feel like if I did more research and I learned about the performance in Angular, probably splitting out modules is like how you gain performance in your application. That may or may not be true, and if you know whether or not that is true and you're watching this, please let me know. Drop a comment down below and help me out and help everybody else out too. So yeah, I feel like I'm just kind of rambling, so I should probably go back. What was it? Yeah, I was mentioning how you need to import components into modules. Styles was a concept that came up. I didn't really fill this out much because we weren't really too focused on like CSS itself, but it's important to know that if you're using straight CSS in Angular, the style sheets are linked inside your component director. We kind of already went over that already, but that component decorator links your CSS files together. And then by default, metadata are scoped to the component. So what they meant by metadata, and metadata is technically one word in this context. They just mean they're just saying that the CSS file that you link to your project or sorry, to your component, it's considered private styles. Which is really, if we go to the docs, wonder, it might even have a section private styles, has to do with like the shadow DOM. If you've ever learned anything about the native web component spec, there's this thing called the shadow DOM. And let's see, I think it's called view in encapsulation. What happened there? Yeah, so basically when you're setting up your component metadata, these are the modes that you can choose from. So shadow DOM is using native shadow DOM. This is the part of the web component spec, which is not implemented in all browsers yet, but the shadow DOM is basically a way to like protect a component from the styles it has applies to itself, and it's not affected by styles outside of it. Nothing outside that component can reach through the shadow DOM and style it unless that component creates hooks that kind of like point out into the outer world to allow other things. So it's a great API, but not supported in all browsers yet. So what Angular defaults to, you can see it says it's the default here, is emulated, which is basically just simulating what the shadow DOM does, but before for now, like it's just not supported in all browsers, so it's not, you can't rely on it yet. And then none is an option, which just means you get rid of that behavior entirely. So yeah, those are the things to know about styles. I can't remember if there's anything else we came across that maybe I forgot to write down. If you've been following along and there was anything that got brought up related to any of this stuff and I didn't cover it in this review, let me know and I'll cycle back and I'll review it. Because if I forgot, might mean I probably need to review it. And then built-in directives. So I just noted the few that I think there was other ones that we came across. I kind of just got tired of writing it down because you could just always go to Angular and just like click, in docs, you would just go to reference, and like API reference. If you wanted, you could just find this stuff. So I didn't feel like there's much value in adding them, but ng4 and ngIf are pretty common ones. Like you're gonna use these in almost every single component you ever make. So it's good to remember it. And I remember the important thing is, for some reason, you need this asterisk. And I do remember that there's like a version of ng4 that looks like this, and I don't know why, but it does something else. And I think the tutorial is kind of just like, yeah, just, use this version of it. So this is how you do an ng4. And then you kind of declare what each, so if you're going through a list of heroes, you're saying each hero is going to be called hero for my loop. And then in here, this is like a event handler, or not an event handler. This is like an event binding. So click is just a native thing, and Angular is giving that to us. And then here is the function that we want to call. This function would have to be defined on our component, remember? And as we're looping through and we get each hero, basically this is registering like a binding. So if you click on that hero, that specific hero gets passed this onSelect method, which was intended at some point to update the selected hero. And if you remember, we kind of actually deleted all that code because we made it so actually instead of having a selected hero, you actually visit a page to go see the details of that hero. And then we got the ngIf, which I think is pretty straightforward, but basically it's just, you can add conditional logic in here. So in this case, selected hero is actually a property on this component, which would be a Boolean, but you could put any Boolean expression or Boolean value in here and it would be a condition. And basically if that condition is true, this div and everything inside of it will be in the DOM. If it's not true, this div and everything inside of it will not be in the DOM, which basically is how you protect yourself against cases of like here. Remember, while we're following along, selected hero actually could have been null or undefined. I can't remember which one, but it wouldn't. This would be an error. You can't call name on undefined or name on null. But this ngIf protects you from that. And TypeScript protects you from it in a way too, because TypeScript will fail to compile. Like you won't even get to run it. It'll tell you that this isn't allowed anyway, which is a nice thing about using TypeScript. There's also data binding in Angular. So this is basically passing data from a parent component down to a child component. Do we have an example in here of that happening? So if I go to dashboard component HTML, let's see. What about in hero list? Oh no, that was a thing. I think I made that for funsies and then I just forgot to delete the directory, so just get rid of that. Yeah, where's a component where we're using another one? We have hero search. Is hero search not used on the heroes page? Or is it just like this whole other thing? I feel like at one point we did have nested components where there's like a parent-child thing going on, but then we just refactored away from it. So I don't know if I have a great example. Yeah, and then where we are using components inside another component, we're not passing any data. But that would be like let's say if app messages took some sort of a prop, like I don't know what kind of prop. I'll just use access key because for some reason that's showing up. If for whatever reason it took that. And also another thing, kind of an awkward thing I feel like in Angular, but I guess with templating languages, what's not awkward? But this, when you do the double quotes, this is expecting like either an expression or a symbol. So like ASDF in this case is not a variable, it's not valid. But because I'm actually trying to pass a string, I can just do this. And that's valid. But anyway, this would be how you pass data from like outside. So if app being the component in this the parent in this relationship, app messages would be the child, and that's kind of how you pass data down. This is what's referred to as data binding. This is referred to as one-way data binding. We also learned about two-way data binding, so we'll revisit that in a minute. But yeah, one thing too, just a side note, I don't remember if we like kind of covered this or not, but let's say I did want this to be a string, like for some reason, like access key actually was just a string. I just don't need the square brackets. And then what's on the right of the equal sign becomes actually a string and not, Angular doesn't think this is something that needs to be evaluated as like actual code. So there's that. Let me just undo this. let's see. So that's data binding. And remember, the way that we set up properties on components is using that at input directory decorator. So yeah, let me do a search. Let me do a search for not decorator, input, at input. We're doing it here, hero detail component. Yeah, I forgot about this one. So where do we use hero detail component? Hero detail component gets used. Oh, it's used by the router. See, that's the thing. At one point, remember earlier in the tutorial, we were like actually using hero detail as a component, and like it kind of looked like this. We had app hero detail, and then the input here is called hero. So we did this hero, and it equaled like our selected hero because we had that method like this from the loop. None of this is going to be valid in this context right now, but at some point this sort of existed, and why hero was a thing that we could bind and pass something into. Or actually, wait, this wasn't a function, it was a variable called selected hero. If it was a function, that would have been in the event binding scenario. I hope I'm not confusing people by tripping up over my own stuff, but this is like how I work through, like when I'm learning stuff, this is kind of how I do it. I play around and I reflect and I double check my understanding of things. But that's how that part works. At input hero, the question mark here in this case just means that it's optional. And here it's mad about that. But if I delete this, and this technically is valid from like a TypeScript perspective, if I don't make this optional, it should be mad at me here. I can't remember. Let's see, hero property hero has no initializer. Oh, it's actually mad because I don't initialize this to anything. Yeah, I'm not sure actually if you do get an error here or not. Maybe if I fix this one, it would. And then we kind of have a grasp, I feel like, on data binding, like a good enough grasp. This is how you make properties on your components that you can data bind into, and this is what we call one-way data binding. Then we have this whole concept called dependency injection, and again, we're gonna have to, I feel like I don't have a great picture of like how it's all supposed to work, but I made enough sense of like what was happening in the tutorial to like put it all together. But basically, Angular provides a dependency injection system where dependencies can be injected into components and services without having to manually instantiate the class using the new keyword. So if you remember, I don't know how many videos back, we actually dove into that a little bit, kind of like unpacked that piece of it. But yeah, if I like, let's go here. So hero service is being injected into this hero detail component. So this is the dependency injection framework doing work. If I didn't have a dependency injection framework doing this, at some point in my code, I would have code that looked like this. I would be creating, for one, I'd be creating like a component, say, an instance of this class, hero detail components, right? Hero detail component, and it takes some constructor arguments. So like I would have to pass an activated route and a hero service and a location service, and basically I'd have to also instantiate all these things and pass all these things. Saying things a lot, but yeah, let's just say these, instead of being strings, were like actual real stuff. This technically is dependency injection, because I'm injecting things that the hero detail component depends on. But when you have a dependency injection framework, it's doing it automatically for you. Like in the case of Angular. And the reason that we want dependency injection at all in the first place is because without this, let's see, where am I using hero service? I'm using it here. If we weren't injecting it at some point, let's say in my constructor probably, I would go this dot hero service equals new hero service and pass in whatever arguments that it needs to be instantiated, and this wouldn't exist. And the problem with doing this is that now if maybe I want to change to a different type of hero service, like maybe a hero service is talking to some like third-party API that sells hero data or something, and maybe their prices got too expensive, and instead of using that service, I want to go use this other one that is cheaper or more reliable or whatever it is, but the API is a little different. So now I have to go everywhere in my code that I new up a hero service. I'd have to replace it with my new hero service that I have to write to talk to the new API. So there'd be a lot of places in the code that I have to go change. And there's this design pattern called the adapter pattern, which you would probably want to do. But the only way that pattern works is if you're injecting your dependencies and not doing this. The other reason is if this is talking to an API, a lot of times in your tests, you don't want services to actually make real network calls out to those APIs, especially if they cost you money. So you want to fake services or stub them in situations where you're testing them, which is why you want dependencies in classes to be injected, whether it's manually where like you just inject the thing, or it's done through some dependency injection framework like how Angular does. So that's the why of like dependency injection in general, and like the sort of like transferable concepts, because this isn't Angular, right? Like this works in backend frameworks and other languages. This concept is in every stack. But yeah, specifically how Angular dependency injection works is this is available to be injected because in my app module, hero service is, I thought we were bringing this in, were we not? Let me see here. Hero. I might have forgotten how these get wired up then. Maybe because it's a class and not a interface, which is something the tutorial never covered. I don't actually need to register this anywhere. Angular just knows how to create this. Let me go over here. Right, okay. And then it knows also to inject these things. So it's kind of, there's like this graph of dependencies, and Angular is sort of fulfilling them all for us. Yeah, for some reason I thought we had to register it somewhere, but maybe we don't. So that's our hero service, and that's a thing that we inject. What else was there related to dependency injection? Oh yeah, so that's what it was. Basically, in order for a thing to be injectable, because like I can't just inject anything in here. It has to be a class that's actually been decorated with this injectable decorator. And then provided in root, I kind of forget exactly what that meant, other than, again, we'll dive into this stuff later in a future video, because this is more just to review what I already understand, not to necessarily learn new things. But I remember Angular has like a global injector, and it's called root. So I'm registering this service with the global injector, which is what makes this like an injectable thing, I guess. And yeah, what else do we got? Man, this could be a long video, which I think I'm probably okay with. We're pushing on 40 minutes now, but there's a lot to review. I don't feel like splitting this up. Routing was a whole other thing too, right? So one, you can use this ng generate command module, and then so this isn't, it says bring routes into your app, but really this is just building a default. Oh, maybe app routing is actually I know I'm speaking in incomplete sentences right now, but so what I'm thinking here is ng generate module. Like this is just a command, and then you give it a name, and you can generate a stub for any module. And -- flat just means put it in source /, right? Don't put it in any nested directory. And then -- module app just means that this module should be registered with app module. So I was thinking like this has nothing to do with routing. It's just that we happen to name it app routing. But I think if I go over here, I think app routing actually might be like a special keyword to the command, to like the CLI. Let me discard these changes. There's nothing we need to keep there. And then I'm going to delete that routing module if I can find it. Delete permanently. Not truly permanently. Always have it in Git, but oh man, my eyes look tired. Just saw myself on camera. Yeah, I don't sleep very much these days. Not with a baby in the house. So okay, what was I doing? I was doing this. I wanted to run this command. There, and we'll drop it into the command line and hit this. And I want to see what kind of a. Oh, okay, yeah. So never mind. For some reason, I remembered that it like defaulted with a bunch of routes pre-registered for us, but I think that was actually just the tutorial gave us that, right? Like I probably copy and pasted that in. Or I also might, you know what I might be mixing this up with is when we scaffolded our route in the first place. Remember there was an option to select whether or not we wanted routing, and so this just must be a convention. It called our routing module app-routing and it put it here. Because remember we had that issue where it's like I went to run the command and it said it already existed. It's because I ran ng generate, or like with the CLI I made a new Angular app and it built app routing for us with some default routes registered. That's probably what I'm thinking of. So yeah, this actually doesn't really have anything to do with bringing routing exactly into your app, but app routing is the convention for your module where you set up your routes. Excuse me. No, I'm gonna discard those changes. And so there is an actual thing in Angular called router module. So really the key here, it's not just this command. That's actually not enough. Specifically, you need to bring in router module and routes, which are libraries from Angular /router. And router module, you call this for route method, and pass it the routes. Pass it the routes. I guess it depends on what country you're from. For routes. And then you have to export it because we're gonna pull. Exporting it is what allows you to go and import it into. Am I remembering that right? Let me read this. The set of components, directives, and pipes declared in this module that can be used in the template of any component that is part of the module that imports this module. Exported declarations are the module's public API. A declaration belongs to one and only one ng module. A module can list another module among its exports, in which case all of that module's public declaration are exported. So basically what it's saying is, you know, router module has some things like router outlet. this router outlet component, if you remember, that came from bringing in router module. And because I'm exporting it here, I'm saying that this module, which I'm creating, my custom app routing module, and it's a module because I have the module decorator right here. I go and I import that in my app module because I import it here. My custom app routing module, it's basically saying anything that this module exports is available to anything that is declared within this module, which includes app component. That's why app component has access. Sorry, not that, but router outlet. Whew. Yeah, routing. It's this one actually feels like one of the more complicated parts. Not complicated like in a bad way. There's just a lot of pieces to know, like a lot of places in your application you got to go to like kind of wire all this stuff up. Although you could, if you wanted to simplify this, you could register all your routes right here in that module. But I think this is a good demonstration of just how to like keep your app a little cleaner, a little more organized. So what else? And then we have the router outlet components. Is basically that'll generate the app routing module and automatically register it with the app module, which is true, but I should add a note. You'll have to register the routes and set up the route module from at Angular. These notes are kind of for me too, so like this is like enough information for me to know that like there's a thing that Angular exports and I can go to the docs and find out exactly what it is, but it's like Angular routes or whatever, right? As long as enough information that if I ever were to forget this stuff, I could Google it and figure it out really fast. And then there's this router outlet component, and basically add that to the root template, and then all components registered with your router will render there. So remember, we did cover this, so some of you probably do remember, but this router outlet is kind of working like a slot, even though Angular doesn't use that terminology. I'm not sure what the equivalent of a slot in Angular actually is, to be honest. I think in Angular 1, I think they called it trans something. Let me, you know what? Let's do a quick Google. Angular slots. Actually, yeah, Angular slots. There is an actual slot functionality. Transclusion. Transclusion was called, and it was from that terminology started back in Angular 1, I believe. So it looks like there's a thing called ng content, which gives you the equivalent of what a slot is. So that'll be an interesting. Actually, you know what? Let's add that to our list of things to learn for later. Let's go here. Whoops. One of these things is Notion. Yeah. Down here, I'll just add a new one. We'll just say slots, aka transclusion. Angular has to be fancy with everything, right? Like, can't just say normal words. They make everything sound like it's harder than it really is. But let's go. Let's go back here. So yeah, this is when I mean slot, I basically mean like this component here. Sitting inside these other components. Again, think of this, even though on the DOM this isn't really nested, you can almost think of it like this, right? So these stay on every page of the app, but this is constantly being swapped out by other components, and the components that's being swapped out with are the ones that were registered here. So if the route is just an empty path, one, we got this set up so you get redirected to dashboard, but also the component that's registered with dashboard, it's this one, is dashboard component. If you go to /heroes, we have heroes component registered, and those components are just being slotted in here. So that's that. And then let's see, go back down to concepts. We did all this stuff, routing. And then there was this one thing. So this was new to me. Maybe you guys already knew this, but TypeScript has a thing called non-null assertion operator. This is unrelated to Angular, so maybe won't worry too much about that. But basically it's just like whenever you do like any variable or expression and you end it with a bang, you're basically just saying to the TypeScript compiler that that value can never be null or undefined. Even if TypeScript thinks it can be, you're letting it know that like you're kind of giving it assistance. It's like, I know that I won't allow this to be null or undefined, so just trust me. You think of it as like an escape hatchet of the type system. And then we went over some tools. I don't know if it's super important to review this stuff, but for completion, let's just I mean, the main tool, if you're using VS Code, is called the Angular. If I spell it properly, maybe it'll come up. The Angular Language Service. This is like, you should just install this right away as soon as you get going. Yeah, it just gives you nice IntelliSense for all the templating stuff. It lets you like command or control click on things, or in VS Code you can just like F12. So I can like jump to different component files related to the files. I can like control click on this template URL here and actually takes me to the template. That's all because of this plugin. So that's definitely the most important one to make sure you have. It'll make your life a lot easier. The other one I think was called, let's see, actually let's just go back to Notion and then I'll remember what it's called. NG Refactor I looked into, but so this is one to just like keep on your radar, because the dev or devs, I can see if there's multiple contributors or not, but like it's a work in progress. There's not really many features in it, so you could install it if you wanted to, but hopefully over time it gets better. This one I would maybe take a look at. What it does is it automatically fixes, like if you are using a component that doesn't exist, or rather hasn't been registered in your app module, it'll automatically fix that error and register it for you. I was struggling to get this to work without kind of like crashing VS Code, so the concept is cool, but right now it's not working, so just keep your eye on it. Maybe it'll get better. Angular Schematics is the one that I do think is worth having. Let's go Angular Schematics. So this one is basically, it lets you run Angular commands in all sorts of places. So I can right click on a file here and I can generate a new component, new service, module, generate another schematic. Not sure what this one, app show. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you can do. You can add pipes and libraries and interfaces and like everything that you can do in Angular. It seems like anything that you can scaffold using the CLI, you can do this just by like right clicking. And then also I think a lot of these commands you can run. Let me escape out of this. Like if I was just sitting here, I think if I went schematics Angular, let's see. Oh yeah, that's right. There is a tab here, so you kind of have this like Schematic Explorer. So you can do all sorts of stuff from here, instead of having to memorize the whole, like all the arguments and how to generate everything properly. Just gives you a nice GUI to be able to navigate all of that. So yeah, that was one of the tools that we had. And then there is one other thing that probably is worth mentioning that we haven't covered yet, and that is the Angular dev tools, which is not a thing that we used. We probably should. So if you go over here, and if you're from Vue or React, you probably know what this is going to be. But yeah, it's a Chrome extension, and so in your Chrome dev tools, you have this tab, and it'll say Angular, and when you're on your application, you can see what actual, rather than looking at like DOM elements, you're looking at like Angular components, and you can see the inputs and outputs, and you can see what data is being set. Haven't used this tool a ton yet myself, really, but on a surface level, it doesn't seem as fleshed out as like React dev tools or Vue dev tools. Just on a first pass, that's my impression of it so far yet. But oh, it does say that there is a profiler, so I mean there could be some more depth hidden to the tool that I just haven't gotten into. Seems something debugging your application. I don't know if they actually mean a real debugger or just like because you can like see things happening, you can debug problems. But yeah, definitely check this out. I don't know if they have a link on their main tool to go download it or not, but I guess you would just go like Chrome, Angular, DevTools, and should be this here. And I'm actually gonna install it because I'm gonna be doing some more Angular in the next while, so I might as well have it. So yeah, that's that. What else do we got to cover? We've covered mostly everything that we've gone through. Yeah, I guess let's go through the glossary of terms and just make sure that we haven't missed anything by reading through the concept. So we did do directive, we did component, pipes. So pipes was another thing. Yeah, basically a transformer function. It's a function that does some work to some data, whatever work you want. But what it is any class that you decorate with a pipe decorator. And Angular comes with a whole bunch of built ones. So let's go look at a couple examples. If I do a global search for space, pipe, space, there should be a couple. So yeah, I guess we didn't make any custom pipes in this tutorial. So that'd be a cool thing to maybe do later, is like, just for the sake of practice, like make a pipe that does something. But this is an example of how you would use a pipe. So this uppercase is basically a function. Like if this were defined somewhere in a component, like actually, you know, let's just like create, let's create our own pipe called lowercase for fun. So ng generate. Actually, you know what? Let me use my handy dandy tools. If I go over here, we go app. Go new file. Oh no, not new file. Oh, what am I doing? Generate another schematic, and I'll say pipe, and I'll call it lowercase. And I'm sure Angular has lowercase, but export to declaring ng module exports this pipe. When true, the default creates files at the top level of the project. So we want to export. We want flat. I think. Skip tests. Yeah, I don't want to create the tests. Do not import this pipe into the owning module. No, I do want to do that. So let's click OK. And export. Okay. True. Confirm. And so that should have made. Let's see. It made a. Did it make anything? Maybe an app. Maybe the command failed. No such file or directory. It tried to go here for some reason. Okay, so maybe this plugin is not as great as I thought it was, but let me try right clicking here. So I want to go app, another schematic. Let me not do the flat flag. So yeah, we'll call it lowercase. And I'm just gonna not do anything. I do want to check off skip test. Let's just keep all the defaults for everything else. And we'll click OK. Okay. Command not found ng. What? Why? Nvmrc. That's weird. How did my node version get switched? Oh, you know what? Because I was in a different shell. I accidentally switched shells and this one wasn't on the. Okay, so this is the command that it generated. So I'll just click that. See this actually work. So yeah, what happened there? I switched to the version of Node that I had ng CLI installed, and then at some point I must have accidentally switched over to this one, which I had not actually switched Node versions back over in. So that's why that happened. But if I go over here, we can see our lowercase pipe. This is what it looks like. So it's any class decorated with pipe. You give it a name, and we might want to do app dash lowercase just because I think we're already there might be a name conflict here. But we do that. So all it is just it's a function. So you say transform, right? And it takes in a value and then args, and you can do whatever you want with any of this. But what I could do is I could say value dot to let's say that it has to be a string. We'll give it a definition. To lowercase. Okay, so we do that. And then it looks like it pulled it into app module for us. So if I go over here, or actually, where was the spot that we found the pipe? Hero name. So instead of uppercase, what if I did app lowercase like that? And also discard those changes. I don't want them. So what does it matter about right now? Unexpected token dash. Oh, maybe you can't name them this way. So it might have to be like that, and then I'll have to rename this one, just be like that. But that seems to work. So if I run this app, and if you didn't remember how, it's ngserve dash dash open, and that's gonna open up a browser in just a minute or so, and it'll open up a Chrome tab, and I'll be able to go to a hero detail page, and instead of seeing the hero's name uppercase like it used to be, it'll be lowercase. And I feel like we'll have a good understanding of let's go to Dr. Nice. So you can see Dr. Nice is all lowercase. So that's how you do pipes. At the end of the day, it's just a function that takes in some value, and then you do whatever you want with it. That's what it is. So let me go here, just discard all this stuff because I don't want to keep any of it. Even though that was fun, just getting our hands in the guts of Angular features here. So it's pipe service, kind of, related to injectables. We kind of already talked enough about this, I feel like, but a service is just any class that uses the @injectable decorator. Just some Angular terminology. And then we have this fancy word called interpolation binding, which is really just saying that anytime you use these squiggly braces inside of a template, and to be clear, let me go to a template. This also is kind of a form of interpolation binding if between these two quotes here. That's probably a good way to think of this, is that this is being interpolated, meaning that the template language is treating the code here like JavaScript code and not just a string. And then the same is, and that's basically what's happening here when you have squiggly brackets. So there's two ways to do this. There's interpolation binding. I don't know if Angular actually calls it interpolation binding, but when it's in these two quotes, it's because it's an attribute. So that's just the way that you do it there. And then when it's not an attribute and it's just arbitrary, you're kind of just saying like, hey, I'm in JavaScript mode when I'm between these squiggly braces. And this could be some variable, it could be an expression, or in our case, it's using this custom pipe, which, by the way, this is not technically, like, this isn't the same thing as doing that, right? This isn't like a Boolean expression. This pipe is custom to Angular's templating language, and it knows what it's trying to do is take this value and pass it as an argument into this function. But yeah, that is the interpolation binding syntax. Where is Notion? Got too many things open at once. Notion's here. Okay. And then the other thing was the class binding. Oh, did I skip one? Application shell. Yeah, I wasn't 100% sure when we read the definition, but I'm pretty sure now. Shell is just whatever the root app is. And I think, like, to be a little more concrete about that, when you go to your app module, you have to specify something to be your bootstrap component. And I think you can have more than one bootstrap component technically, but the bootstrap component that you use to mount in your index.html, this is your shell. I'm pretty sure. If you know that I'm wrong, please let me know. But yeah, that's just your root component. And then class binding syntax. So this is an important thing to know too. Anytime that, and I don't know if we have an example of this because we deleted it following the tutorial. Let me do a quick search for how would I find it? And do some regex here, maybe be like any literally a square followed by any number of that, and then how many occurrences of this? Ooh, maybe too many. No, it's not too bad actually. So let's just go. Okay, so I'm not seeing class binding syntax, and I think that's just because the section of the tutorial where we added it, we ended up refactoring away from it. So I don't have any code to show, but also, why is this not formatted? There we go. But yeah, basically inside of an element, you would, like an attribute, you treat it kind of like data binding, but you would do class, which is like a keyword in Angular, and then you would say dot, and then whatever the class name is that you want to apply to this element conditionally. Remember the use case for this in the Angular app was here. Remember before this brought you to a new page, it used to highlight the hero when you clicked on it. So basically when you click, we wanted to add a class on it that added that highlight. So that's the use case for class binding. But yeah, so you bind it. So you're saying, I want this class, whatever you call it. Let's just say it was like selected, for example. It's going to be added whenever this condition is true. This being any valid JavaScript expression or Boolean variable. So that's how you do that. And then property binding. We kind of already talked about this. Again, it's like if you have a component with an @input decorator on a property of that class, that becomes a prop. In Angular terms, they just call it property, which is fine, but whatever your component is, this becomes a thing that you can pass values into. Yeah, specifically property binding is when we pass a value as a prop from one component into another. This is what's called one-way data binding. There's also event binding, has a very similar syntax, but it's parentheses instead of brackets. And you can listen to any of the native events like click events, or there's custom events in Angular 2, but we didn't cover any of that in the Tour Heroes app, so I'm not gonna really go into that today either. Maybe we'll learn that stuff in a future video. But basically here we're just saying on this element, we're listening to click events, and whenever that click event comes, we want to do this. In this case, we're passing it some handler function, which would belong on the component class that's associated with whatever template this is being used in. Yeah, and then we have providers, which I'm really like. Providers and injectors, they seem very similar to me, so I don't really know what I can say about this because I think we just have to dive into dependency injection a little more in a future video, get a better understanding of it. So I'm just gonna skip these for now. And then observables, like this is like a whole topic, but really if you know about promises, which is kind of like the modern way of handling asynchronous tasks in JavaScript, and I know people usually use async await, but my understanding of async await is that it's a syntactical sugar on top of promises, or rather maybe it's not exactly promises, but it's like yield and generators. Technically you can simulate async await. I might not be 100% correct on that, but really anything that returns a promise is awaitable in JavaScript. And observables are just like a wrapper around promises, is kind of what I understand. It's a wrapper around promises, and it's a way to be able to listen to streams of data. So rather than having like a promise kind of resolves one time, like once it goes out, it gets the data, it just gives it to you all at once. Observables can keep receiving data from some other source, whether that is literally a stream, like a native stream, or some other part of the application that keeps pushing things onto it, and then other places in the app that pull that observable in can subscribe to it. So the mental model that I've always been told to kind of have is like, you think of a stream of streams. If this doesn't make sense to you, it's like, it took me a while to grasp observables, to be honest, and I don't think I can cover it in this video, but that's my review of observables. It's not actually really an Angular thing, it's an RxJS thing, but Angular kind of includes a bunch of RxJS functionality. And then subject is, again, it's an RxJS thing. It's like an observable, but it can be both a source of observable values, and it can be an observable itself, right? So you can subscribe to a subject just as you would any observable, but you can also like actually push data onto that subject. So I guess I should correct, observable isn't necessarily something that you can push data onto. That would technically be a subject, which you can treat like it's an observable. So I think that basically covers everything. I thought maybe we'd walk through a little bit more code, but we did do a lot of code diving in the editor. We covered everything that I took notes on. I think we're pushing close to, we're actually over 1 hour. So this is the longest video in this series. Hopefully it wasn't too dry, but you know what? A couple people said I was moving a bit too fast. So I thought, you know, if you're following along this and none of this mattered to you, this review, you could easily just skip it. For the rest of you who wanted maybe to revisit some stuff, hopefully this was really helpful. It was helpful to me, just revisiting everything, walking through it, and kind of tinkering with the code and stuff. It's all just helping me remember all this stuff and helping me be able to you know, hopefully in the future I'll recall this stuff easier. This is just how I learn, and we'll keep going down. I think the next step probably would be to start adding our own functionality to this Tour Heroes app. I'll have to do some reflection on this whole series and where I want it to go. So if you have any suggestions or any topics that you want me to cover, I'd love some feedback. And that's yeah, is there anything else to say? I'm kind of leaning towards building out this Tour Heroes app more, to really just create a lot of excuses for using more features in Angular. Actually maybe turn this into like a real functional application, with something, maybe a little bit of a backend, and you know, like error handling and like empty states, and just just all the typical stuff that actually goes into application. Obviously, a big one would be authentication, which authentication would be a good use, or sorry, a good excuse to introduce some state management. It's usually kind of the first thing that you introduce in an application, where you want like a global application state, not just something that gets passed down from one component into another. So yeah, I'm really tired and I'm very rambly today, and I should probably just stop talking and let's just end the video. So if you watched all of this, thank you so much. Obviously this was valuable to you if you made it this far. So if it was that valuable to you, it's a huge help for me if you hit that like button on the video. And it's supporting my channel if you subscribe, and please do if you want to see more of these videos. I am pretty active on Twitter also, so if you want to follow me over there, Dan Fletcher Dev. I tweet updates about the stuff that I'm working on and like the videos that I want to get out. It's also where I broadcast when I'm about to go live on Twitch at the original dev, or not the original dev, original Fletch. And yeah, like I said, I'm tired, I'm rambly today, I'm sorry. Do all the social media things. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video when I am hopefully better rested and less crazy. All right, I'll see you guys. Bye.